Welcome to 20 Minutes into the Future, where we are featuring today the fantastic Martin Newell. Not only is Martin the most published living poet in the UK, he's also a
I
legendary
was. Go on, sorry, I'm interrupting. I should
and a
ask
home
me
keeper
later.
with dozens of albums, 173 credits on Discogs. It's produced under his own name and under the Stray Trolleys, the Brotherhood of Lizards, and of course, the Cleaners from Venus. Martin Newell, thank you so much for being with us here today.
Yes, thank you for having me. In a way.
So, a thing that we're really excited about is this documentary about you that's coming out.
Oh, I see. What the Jangling Man?
The
Yeah.
Jangling Man, yes.
That's fairly soon, you know.
Yes.
Because it was meant to complement the re-release by Captured Tracks of the Off-White album, which is out on Friday.
Right.
Yes.
Very soon.
Yeah, but both the directors, James Sharp, the director here, and his compatriot Jim, who's his name's gone. Sorry, he's American anyway, but they both got COVID separately from each other.
Oh, wow.
Oh, no.
And excuse me, I'm going to silence this phone because someone's bound to ring me on it. James got COVID because his mother works in healthcare or something.
Oh, no.
And got it from one of the clients, and I think Jim got it from his brother. That's right. I'm just silencing this.
And
it takes me a little while to do it myself.
And you're talking about James Sharp, who is the director of this documentary.
Yeah. He's very, very tall. I get on with him really well, actually. We've done a lot of extra filming.
Cool.
And I think we're going to be working together in the future. I mean, he started filming back in February of 2018. And, you know, things kind of dragged on as they do with films. You can bet a film's going to take at least a year and a half more than they say it will. It was meant to be a cheap and cheerful 20-minute documentary, and it was meant to go out with something Captured Tracks. I can't even remember what it was now that Captured Tracks were doing back in 2018. And it's kind of then COVID got in the way, so we lost a year from that. So now it's over 3 years later, and it is about to be finished. It does look good. Have you seen any of the trailers from it?
I have, yes. I've got my tote bag in the other room. I did the Kickstarter. I'm
there's a trailer from it with me riding around on a bike and all that. But there is loads more than that. I've seen some of it.
It's very Flann O'Brien with the bicycle. It's very Third Policeman.
Oh right, yeah, I know. Oh yeah, Miles Nagoplin.
Yeah,
I remember. That's his Irish name.
Yes.
Yeah,
possibly.
I
was going to say,
it's maybe just me riding a bike. I don't know how to drive a car. I've never driven.
We
one.
had conjectured this.
There were certain things.
You know, so I'm a very recent convert to the driving. I only learned in the last year and a half myself. But with all of the stuff about bicycling and whatnot, we were guessing offline that I wonder if Martin even knows how to drive.
I'm dyspraxic.
Oh. Interesting.
I can't play a drum kit either. I know how it works. I can't physically do it. It's not just, I can't walk and chew gum. I can't walk and chew gum and read and listen to a radio. Well, I probably could, but it fused my brain. There are certain things that I just can't do. And it took ages. And when we found out why, I said, why am I dyspraxic? Because we only found this out a few years ago. And they said, it commonly goes with Aspergism. And I said, but I'm not Aspergic. And they said, well, hasn't anybody told you that you might be? And I said, no. and then I did this test. And so I showed it to my partner who works with Aspergic people and knows a lot about it and has seen these tests. He said, which test did you do? And I said, I did that one. I said, how many questions? I said, 50. And she said, what did you score? And I said, 30, which means that I admit it means I'm borderline.
Wow.
And she said, would you mind doing it under supervision? And I said, no. So we went through it together and it came up quite a bit higher. Not severely, but, it's... but it did, and over the next year, I sort of raked back through my past and figured out various things that had happened to me with regard to girlfriends, human relationships with people, classic mistakes that human beings make.
How interesting.
And it all sort of tallied up, and eventually I came to accept that, yes, I was probably Aspergian.
Wow.
And that goes with dyspraxia. And so, but I can play a piano, but nobody really knows how I do it or how I learned. And it's not a conventional way of playing it. You know?
How
I don't play it with my nose or anything, but
sure. Well, yeah, this is kind of interesting to me in terms of your career, because I mean, you certainly have this story of having played in some bands and then kind of moved on to recording on your own. I was kind of curious in that transition myself. I was always wondering, well, did you end up like buying a bunch of gear, or how did you compensate for?
No, my dad brought some old tape recorder home from the office in Singapore when we lived there when I was 12.
Oh.
He was an army officer.
Okay.
And he said, "This has come out of my office. We've got a new one." And it was just like a little 3-inch reels, but it was a tape recorder for, I don't know, whatever the army tape records things for. Probably informational, recording minutes of meetings or something.
Sure.
And I played with this thing, and I found out you could slow it down. Then I had a friend with a tape recorder, and we devised a way of doing these little plays. And I figured out, look, if you record that, us clapping and shouting, and then we clap and shout and play that, and then record it with this with a slight distance, we can get a crowd scene going.
Yeah.
You know? So I was already figuring that out, and it was only a matter of time before I bought, when I was about 20, I think it was, I bought a Sony TC630, which allowed me to do sound-on-sound recordings.
Right.
That means they were in mono.
Yeah.
So you record on that side, then you listen to that and you record on that side. And there was a third button that you open up that third tape, and it also allowed you an echo facility.
Nice.
It did something. It put a delay on it. So what you got was loads of hissy overdubs of me, and most of Blow, in fact, all of Blow Away Your Troubles was recorded on that eventually.
Okay.
But by that time, I was getting a bit burned out because I'd had it for 5 or 6 years.
Sure. Now I don't.
And then the Porter Studio was invented, and I never looked back after that.
Sure.
But I had been in studios. I knew about studios, but only little cheap ones. And then, of course, as soon as I was recording, then I started working in 16s and 24s. And then I went back to 4-track because, the Beatles recorded Rubber Soul on a 4-track. It was a very expensive 4-track, and they had George Martin.
Right. Sure. But it worked for them. Why not? Well, yeah, I always find the gear.
Well, that's what I thought.
I always find the gear talk.
I just thought, in theory, I have the same facilities as the Beatles. I have a 4-track. I should be able to do something.
Yeah.
And I've always worked with, forwards, into the future. I never thought of it as being old-fashioned or retro or anything, because I regarded the Beatles, who were something of heroes to me, among others. I've never thought of them as old-fashioned. I thought of them as futurists, because they really were at the time. Everything they did, so seemed to go further into the future, including the use of synthesizers on Abbey Road and all that stuff.
I re-listened.
But I also liked their songs.
I re-listened not too long ago to Tomorrow Never Knows for a project I was working on. A song that I kind of know, but I hadn't really listened to closely in, 20 years or something like that. And I totally hear what you're talking about with that future sound, where it still sounds kind of like, how did they do this? Like, what did they like channel something?
I know how they did it roughly, but I now know the world knows how they did it.
Sure.
But the fact of the matter is that they did that, and it was possibly really closer to something that Stockhausen would have done than, say, anything else. And I know that at least Paul McCartney, who everyone thinks is a nice, simple, sweet, right, and Lennon's the genius and all the rest of it. There's a bunch of stupid hippies who thought that, when I remember. And people don't know. Paul McCartney was the pioneer here. He was the avant-garde one. He was the one who was hanging out in London, and staying with quite a posh family, Jane Asher's family. I was listening to that yesterday. He was exposed to things like Stockhausen and modern art. He was the real arty side of the Beatles. But anyway, without getting into too much of that, it wasn't so much them as the idea that there's this old saying, and I'm not even sure where it comes from: "Follow not in the footsteps of the ancients, only seek what they sought." So that's it. I'm not trying to copy them. I'm trying to sort of, what were they after? You know, what was it? You know, I wanted to join the trail of that particular gold rush, if indeed that's what it was.
Yeah.
Gold rush of ideas.
So something we were wondering about, you had mentioned COVID earlier and how that disrupted filming, how that gave you time to work on the album. How are things with COVID in Wivenhoe there?
They're really well, you know. I mean, Wivenhoe is kind of a bit of a middle class place, really, in a lot of ways, and people have that concomitant middle class health conscious neurosis about it. I don't, because my dad was an army health professional. Apart from being a trained killer, he was also in the medical corps, which meant when he wasn't, you know, killing people, he was meant to be fixing them up. Outside, at least. So he was actually environmental health, army environmental health. So he was very keen on things like hygiene, you know, and, you know, not getting athlete's foot or anything. You know, he was right down on us for that, and I took it in at least, and so I've just been really careful. I wore the mask. I didn't go out to play. I didn't bend the rules or try and cheat or do anything or go out to any secret parties. I thought, I'm not doing that. And anyway, I can be a very solitary creature. You know, I've got all my studio stuff here, and I'm a writer and record, and I've got a bike. I can go out, and the one thing I haven't done is seen my partner, Hillary, who is probably, I don't know if you can see, there's a picture up in there in the background. Might be about there, just by the mirror.
Yes.
I took an earlier picture of her. You know, she's kind of like Granny out of the Clampets now, but she's not. She'd kill me.
Yeah.
And so, but I liked that picture because it looks like something out of one of those Edwardian horse dramas that they produced in the BBC did so well in the 70s.
Right.
Oh, father, a new pony. I shall call him Star. May I ride him?
I think I saw that one 100 times.
Yeah. He comes running across the fields, and then eventually, you know, some guy comes along and sweeps her off her feet. Oh, if that doesn't happen, I turn up instead.
Yeah, sometimes that's how those books go.
Yeah.
Pretty much always. Well, something I was definitely wondering, you are so prolific, and as we said, you are the most published living poet in England. And what I really wanted to know was, what is a poem versus what becomes song lyrics? Because I know there's a little crossover, but it seems pretty distinct a lot of the time.
Well, I usually, the closest I can get. I don't know if I'm any more England's most published living poet, but I certainly was for a few years.
Yeah.
Because of how many I wrote for newspapers. Did you hear that? I think it was an email. What is the difference? It's hard to say. I discussed this with the poet laureate Simon Armitage and a writer as well in front of for a poetry breakfast at the literature festival, which I don't do many of them. But I just said, you know, that poetry and lyrics are not the brother and sister which people think they are. But I do think that they are kissing cousins. And there's they're permitted to marry sometimes. For that they're permitted to marry because they are cousins.
For artistic reasons.
But they don't do. But you wouldn't do it all the time, kind of thing. I mean, a lot of song lyrics do not work as poetry, and a lot of poetry isn't really very singable. Well, a lot of mine is because I specialise in what some people regard as pretty old-fashioned rhyming verse. I do. I rhyme.
Yeah.
I'm a rhymester, you know, and I do rhyme, but I use good classic rhymes, and so did several other people who I admire, like Betjeman and Houseman and all these other people. What I tend not to like is metaphysical poets or difficult academic bastards, you know.
Mm-hmm.
People who you think, excuse me, what was that about? Because poetry is the brand. I regard poetry as the brandy in literature's cocktail cabinet. It's only small. It's quite strong. It has to do a big job in a little shot, so you've better make it count.
Yeah,
and so you better make it lucid because poetry is a form of communication. And once upon a time, it was a device in pre-literate times, I believe, for the memory of the tribe. Whoever had the great memory and remembered that Hrothgar was the father of Ragnar or something like that, that at times of celebration or great loss round a fire, this person with the memory would be able to recite this. And to do that in pre-literate times, you'd need to have at least a rhythm, and in Saxon cases, alliteration, and sometimes a rhyme too, because it would help you hold that whole lot in your head, so you could bang it all off. And that, I think that's how it came about. But I like little nonsensical rhymes, and I think there's room for it. And I dislike the way that certain academics, hold it above the heads of the lumpen,
right,
as if to say, we know this stuff. Hey, kids, don't try this stuff at home. It's heavy. And because that's what they do. And then they create, because no one's listening anymore, because everyone's kind of, I like poetry. Yeah,
right.
yeah. I mean, people hear the word poetry, and you only have to say the word poetry. You can empty a room. People just they go off like wildebeest at the scent of a lion. They think poetry, yes, worthy, good, incredibly dull. Anyone fancy a pint? America
you're right. It's presented as very intimidating and very much you have to be educated in this certain way to produce poetry, and you have to follow all of these rules, or at least in the school systems I went to, it was a very fraught topic. And when we had to go and write poetry, it was a bad scene. Everybody was very embarrassed.
Well, you could have just written nonsense stuff or funny stuff. But I've always thought it's good to rhyme. And people say, yes, but rhyming is so trite. It means you are confined to what you. I said, no, it is a cage to be brilliant in. It's a cage to dance in. Like a go-go dancer.
Yeah. Yes.
With tassels.
One thing I was wondering is, how did the documentary come about?
Well, and in this case, my life, you wait 20 years for a documentary, and like London buses, 3 come around the corner at the same time. But that's what happened. Well, I was approached by. I'd had a documentary made for me for British TV a few years ago, back in 2003. But that was just about a week in my life. But this one, Captured Tracks, wanted a 20-minute film to capture something of the essence of me, because they knew I probably wouldn't tour, or it was very likely I wouldn't tour. So they sent James, who was good friends with Pamela Garavano-Culbo, and good mates with her husband. She was the important lady there. She was the one directors up there. And they sent James. They thought maybe an Englishman ought to be filming an Englishman because he'd understand it better and he'd capture things, because James knows America as well. And it was going to be about 20 minutes. It was going to go out on the back of a record in July of 2018. And it kind of didn't. Because gradually there was more and more stuff, and James went and took the rushes back, and they said, "Oh, we got this." And we also found out he does this, and I've got these shots of where he lives, the bicycle, and then it turned out there was a bunch of kind of celebrities or rock celebrities or people like that who wanted to say something, and as this piled up, James just took my address book and went around and interviewed it. He took people I know, and he didn't never mind driving a long way. And he even got one or two people in bands I was in quite young. Now, at the same time, this other guy turned up. James is very checked up and everything, and he's a professional filmmaker. But this other guy turned up who's a photo cinematographer called Graham. And he too has a reputation because he's written things for The Guardian, but he's got a far more left field outsider mentality. So he said, could I make a documentary? And I was thinking, he said it needn't be onerous. I could just come up here and film you talking occasionally. And it wasn't onerous. But he did dig a little bit deeper, and he found people in two of my earliest bands. And he went all the way down to Exeter to interview one and down to Bath to interview another. And he just travels on a train with one kind of camera. And then he edits at home.
Very lo-fi.
And he made this. We got a premiere in the West End of London, and the same film got in the West End of London. The same film got shown at New York University. It's called Upstairs Planet.
Mm-hmm.
If you look it up, there won't be many trailers of it, but he got that. He actually got that finished.
Nice.
So we had a premiere in August of 2019.
Wow.
A premiere in the West End, in the West End's oldest and most venerable cinema, the Regent Street cinema.
Not bad.
Which was originally a theatre in 1860. And I kind of didn't believe it. And then this Guardian journalist, who's also a professor at New York University, came along and said, we could show this. And this is the New York University where people like Martin Scorsese train. So they've got their own little cinema up there. So I said, where is this cinema in New York? And he said, Broadway. So we've gone with this DIY film of this DIY guy. He even met, the doctor who'd saved my eyes, because I did a special concert for the eye team at the hospital for the ophthalmology unit and set up this little charity called iTunes, whereby any money we make off this concert, which is another film later on, can go to the eye unit, buy them more kits to save people's eyes. But so that's happening, and so anyway, James's film just grew, and I think it's probably going to be about 90 minutes now. So it's going to be a full feature-length documentary, and there are people interested, cinema chains interested, lots of people interested in it.
Wow!
And you've seen the trailer. Well, that's kind of more of that, and me doing this.
And
but then they've got me up a tree at one point because I was pruning Hillary's walnut tree. And so it was winter. So just coming on the winter, I thought we'd better get that down. So you'll see that on the trailer. There's me sort of up a tree. I've got a ladder. I'm kind of snipping away at stuff and with a bow saw, chucking stuff out.
Wow.
And my rigger boots and that.
And a lot of this is in connection to this reissue of the Off-White album that's kind of coming out as well.
Yes, it is. Well, between that and The Greatest Living Englishman, the two should have come out closer together, but what with one thing or another.
Yeah.
They haven't.
And was it you wanted those specifically to be reissued? Like, what was the motivation behind?
No, I think Mike Sniper wanted them because The Greatest Living Englishman is quite a famous record.
It is.
Probably my most famous solo album. Yeah, it's well thought of, and well thought of by most people. There are a few hi-fi buffs and XTC experts you should get, because XTC have a huge male following of musical experts who kind of like, know everything like that. And they
Heather knows all about that.
And they like having named musicians working, and isn't it great? We get Andy Partridge together with some Pat Metheny or something like that, or they like all this stuff, but they don't like getting together with me because they just saw me as the equivalent of a cheap little tart. Really taking their hero away, with my hoop earrings and my overly loud red lipstick, come swinging in my fishnet stocking and say, "Hey, Andy, I've got some songs." Like Peg out of what's that thing? Family, what's that? Married with Children,
In terms of the reissuing for this Off-White album, were you involved in any of the remixing or production elements, or was it more kind of like?
We didn't remix it. No, I think it's been remastered.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Cleaned up a bit. But no, you're getting the Off-White album that came out that was kind of practically ignored in England, and also because it was seen as a kind of rather plainer sister of The Greatest Living Englishman.
Okay.
This is his kid sister, and she doesn't put on all that makeup and stuff, and she just kind of is very studious.
Gets good grades.
The Off-White album is probably got more crafted songs on it, and they were being written, as I've explained, directly in the wake of me finishing the Greatest Living Englishman. The Greatest Living Englishman was it wasn't all written at the same time. Some of those songs were a bit older than others. It was, I gave Andy something like 20 songs and he picked about 6 of them and said, have you got any more? I thought, blimey, they're my best songs. I don't know what I'm going to give him next. But so I wrote some new ones. She Rings the Changes was brand new at the time. Some were written pretty much at his request. And I was amazed that he rejected some songs that, are still favourites for the people to these days, from the Cleaners from Venus. But there's a lot of new songs, but some of the songs were older. I'm trying to think what was an older song there. Most of them were written around about 1991, then some written in 93. There's possibly a couple of older ones there. They weren't ancient, but the Off-White album, that was just written within a few weeks and months. Most of it was written. I think A World of Dandy Lee was written earlier, and maybe Arcadian Boys, but the rest of it was all, written on my piano in between doing gigs and tours and doing poetry gigs and all sorts of stuff.
I feel like we should kind of mention some things where we can find you. You mentioned the Cleaners from Venus Bandcamp page, which I think is an excellent resource. You're also on Twitter.
Well, there's a website. There's a website, Twitter. I'm on Instagram, although I don't run that. My manager, Johnny, puts things up there, but he usually feeds into them from Facebook. Lots of me on Facebook. I've got a Facebook account and a Facebook page. But the Facebook page, I run that, and I regularly diarise that or put things that are going on there. That's quite lively, that.
And there's
also the Oddcast on Mixcloud.
The Oddcast, I do that every week. Yeah, now that's the Oddcast.
How did that get started?
And I sometimes.
How did that get started?
Oh, someone just said, "Would you do a podcast?" And I did one, and then gradually it became the Oddcast, and it became in the format it is, about 8 tracks, about half an hour long, and some old chat from me. And then occasionally just do a themed one, like I did about miniatures this week. Morgan Fisher's miniatures, and actually for publishing, if you went to these sites, if you especially went to the website, Cleaners from Venus website, which is a new one now, fairly new, it's about a year old, I think. Then there'll be plenty of contacts on that, and how to get in contact and all the rest of it, and how to find books and things. It has become more popular. I mean, it really was a cottage industry, and I had to take on a manager, Well, I met Johnny, who was running a little record company, and we got on very well. And he said, look, we could probably make this go. And I said, well, will you be my manager then? Because he's very trustworthy. And I can be dependent, unlike a lot of stars, and that to be there, to be on time, and to do my homework.
You've been more than generous with your time, so thank you so much for chatting with us.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, anything else before we wrap up, Heather?
No, we've so appreciated speaking with you. This has been wonderful.
Okay, so I'll say thank you and good night. Good night, Andromeda.